So thank you for having me here today. As some of you know, this is my hometown. And after this, I get to go have dinner with my 98-year-old grandmother. So it's always fun to be back in New Haven. And it's a place that I really love. My family's been here for a very long time. My grandmother was born in her house here 98 years ago. Right off the Yale campus. So, and before that, many generations have lived in New Haven. So it definitely has a special place for me. I also went to school at SOM, and so have a lot of connections here. Met my husband at SOM, so our kids are like SOM kids or something, I don't know. And have been pretty involved with the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute and a bunch of other things down in New Haven around entrepreneurial pursuits, and always host a bunch of people up in Boston from New Haven. So a lot of good connections here, and it's really fun to see the entrepreneurial community really growing here. That's how it feels to me. I'm sure it feels that way even more to you. So, it was awesome to meet. I think I met 6 or 7 companies today, to see the kind of diversity and thinking that's going on. It's just really fun, and I think you're growing something special in this community. I thought I would just really talk about, for maybe 15 minutes, talk about what I think are the real cores to growing a vibrant entrepreneurial community. And for those of you who don't know who I am, which I assume most of you, I run something called Techstars in Boston, which is an accelerator program. We invest directly into about 25 to 28 companies per year, and we do intensive mentorship, community-driven mentorship. So companies come and we all live together in a space for a very time-boxed period, about 3.5 months. And we have about 200 mentors. These are people who have grown successful businesses themselves, come and mentor companies for that time period. And at the end, we try to help figure out, how should they fund this business? How should they grow their business? And try to get them on the right track depending on what they want. And for some of those people, it's venture capital dollars because they need a lot of money to grow quickly. For some people, it's angel funding. For some people, they want to customer fund it the whole way. And all of those options, I think, are incredibly important and incredibly valid. And so we try to grow an ecosystem in which there are lots of ways to grow a business. And so you hear things like, oh, there's a Series A crunch. Well, businesses are still being grown through a Series A crunch, right? You just pick a different tack. You're an entrepreneur. You got to have options. And so we spend a lot of time working with companies around the best way for their business today to grow. But none of that happens very well. I mean, a few entrepreneurs get lucky, but none of that happens very well without having a very strong community around you. It's incredibly lonely, and there are lots of down days being an entrepreneur, where everyone has told you no. You have realized you need a heck of a lot more capital than you have right now. You probably don't have the team you want. 15 people have told you no directly about something, whether it's capital or this or that or the other thing. And sometimes you feel like a lot of the doors are closed on you. And so what I think a lot about is, how do you grow a strong enough community so that no matter what moment you hit, you have a group of people that can open your eyes to either possibilities or direct opportunity. And so I'll just tell you what I think that's based on. And I have 4 words that I think are incredibly important. And the first is love, and the second is truth, and the third is time, and the fourth is commitment. And those are kind of amorphous words, but when I get down to the heart of what drives a great entrepreneurial community, it is those 4 things. And so I'm going to just say a little bit about each one and how I see those incredibly important pillars working. So the first is in really vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems, and I've mainly grown up in tech, but I've played in a bunch of different areas, hardware, med device, but in some ways they all relate to tech somehow. So that's my perspective. There are actually other perspectives equally as valid around different kinds of businesses, but that's the genre I grew out of. So, and when I say love, this is what I mean. When you meet someone, and there have been these people in my life, actually a lot of them, it is people who love growing and supporting entrepreneurs. And vibrant communities are based on those people. And many places have one or two of those people. And just that number of people can grow an extraordinary community around them. I happen to live in a city with a bunch of those people because there's been this deep, rich technology development there. But my hypothesis is that a community can grow around just a few of those people. And when you meet them, what their relationship to the entrepreneur is that feeling it's almost parental in the best sense of parental, which is, I want to help you discover where you want to get to, right? So it's that fundamental relationship that when you find those people, like for me in Boston, Bill Warner, who's the founder of Avid, an unbelievable entrepreneur, very, very successful entrepreneur. He plays that role in my life, which is, he is all about where does Katie want to get to? And he plays that role for many, many entrepreneurs in Boston. And just him, he's got this like thriving ecosystem of entrepreneurs around him. He can't help every single one, but he always comes back to that fundamental relationship of, I want to see you get to where you want to go. Not, I'm telling you where to go, or you should go there, but I want to help you get to where you want to get to. And when those people show up in a community, really good stuff happens. And so when I work with entrepreneurs and when I pick entrepreneurs that I want to invest into, that's the first thing I check for myself is, can I get into that kind of relationship with an entrepreneur where I care about them and a founding team in a fundamental way? Like, I just love this team and what they're going to go discover and what they're going to go do. And, I want to help them get there in whatever way they're going to get there. So I think that's fundamental. And I see it all the time where it is working, and I see it when it's not working. And when it's not working, and when that relationship isn't there, you just see this there's kind of this icky feeling when you walk in of like, the entrepreneurs are paying this guy to do this, and ooh, it feels weird and bad. And so I think knowing, is that fundamental relationship here? I think just look for it. And if it's not, it's really, really fundamentally easy to fix, because you could just step up and be that person, right? So that's my first. The second is, and it's built on the first, is this also fundamental relationship that entrepreneurs have to have with each other and whatever is surrounding them, which is kind of real truth seeking and being able to tell the truth about where they are. And I love entrepreneurs, I'm entrepreneurial, I'm married to an entrepreneur, but there's a lot of hustle, and there are these moments of truth that every entrepreneur has to get to about like, oh no, this is where my company really is. And entrepreneurial communities that are vibrant allow that to happen. You don't have to always be hustling. You can have a place where you can say to somebody, no, this is where I really am. My co-founder is going to leave. My 3 customers just said my product wasn't good enough, and I'm out of cash. And you can still get people to be behind you, right? You could be at that lowest moment of an entrepreneur, And maybe your wife left too, I don't know. Like the really lowest moments. And still have people say, I'm behind you. Let's go figure this out. And let's go figure out, like, do you really have a business here? Should you shut it down? Should you, fire your co-founder, find a new one? Like, help you figure out what your options are. But without that fundamental kind of truth seeking and ability to tell the truth to the people around you, you're not having the opportunity to really grow a vibrant business. So I think that is really fundamental and often doesn't happen. And I see a lot of places where there's a ton of hustle, and that's great because it's like a fundamental skill to winning. But then when I see a really vibrant community, I see that ability to have that happen. And in a place like Techstars where people are together and we know each other really well, that is the first thing I try to set up. So when I pick a group of entrepreneurs that are all going to come into our space, what I try to figure out beyond which ones do I love to work with, I try to figure out, will they feel safe enough with each other to tell the truth and to lay it out there? And if I feel like there's two that are super competitive, I just won't take the other one. Because I would never sacrifice that fundamental pillar for that reason. There's plenty of choices. So when I set it up, that's the kind of second thing that I really think about strongly. The third is time, and this is a tricky one, especially in this accelerator, incubator, co-working space thing. I'll tell you what we've come to believe over a bunch of years at Techstars, which is that time boundedness is really important. That's one really important thing. But then long-term relationships that involve time are also really, really important. So when I think about setting up a community, we like to bound the time that we spend together, because then you can have this unbelievable push and surge of understanding your business and pushing you to the next point. It's like a forcing function, right? Like, you're not going to stand up on demo day and feel like an idiot. You're going to go figure out a bunch of stuff so that you have made progress. So that time boundedness is important. But then the other thing that we try to set up is that those relationships last for a long period of time, because startups need mentors and cheerleaders and people that will be there for the long haul, right? And so that's why we try to have companies meet just a few people, 5 to 8 people that will just be on their side in some way, some in a big way, some in a personal way, others in just a business sense. But I think, stretching time in both those ways, compressing it and expanding it in real relationship, is fundamental to a true startup community. And so, I talk to a lot of accelerators and incubators and co-working space and try to figure out with people ooh, how are you constraining time? And then how are you stretching it? Because I think it's a really fun one to play with. And then the last is commitment. And, this goes to all 4 of these to the other 3. But the commitment piece is, so I feel that in really strong relationships, again, you're always coming back. If you're one of those ecosystem pillars, right, that an ecosystem can be built around, I think you always have to be checking yourself by your commitment. Like, what is your commitment to the entrepreneur? And I'll tell you the commitment that I make that I think has been very, very good, which is I am always committed to telling my entrepreneurs what I see. Like, being truthful with them is my fundamental commitment, and with a lot of humility in that truthfulness, because there's only so much I know and only so much of a perspective that I have. But I'll tell you, that very, very few people tell founders the truth. And right, because there's this like funny little thing where you're like, if you're a venture capitalist, you're like, oh, I'd never want to burn a bridge with an entrepreneur. Who knows? Maybe it was the big idea and I want to get in on their next round. Or if you're a service provider in some way, a lawyer, you're thinking, well, I don't want to burn a bridge with anybody. So there aren't that many people in which they know a lot about your business and they'll tell you the truth, how they really see what's happening. And so, but I think it's fundamental to be committed to that, and also committed to the person. Like, I am committed to my entrepreneurs, and you know, that's the relationship I want to have, but I think you should think about, what are you committed to? Because I think if you're committed to the entrepreneurs and telling them the truth, the relationships happen. If I want to get into a deal, I tend to get into a deal because I'm real with people and I try to add value, but I'm real. So I think just making sure that your community has those fundamental tenets just grows entrepreneurial ecosystems really quickly. It's easy to add people then, it's easy to add ideas, it's easy to make the ideas better, it's easier to bring in capital, because people like to be in entrepreneurial ecosystems that have this. And you know, New Haven, you have a ton of riches in terms of, you know, smart people. You have lots of success behind companies that have come out of New Haven. Everybody feels like there's not enough success, but there's a lot of success and there's a lot of brains and there's a lot of innovation coming out of the university and many universities around here. So, but I think if you set up these other things, it's so much fun. And lots of good things happen. So that's all. Happy to take questions, happy to talk about anything, Jobs Act or whatever, but that's it. So I can't see you, so you have to really raise your hand. Oh, anybody want to talk about anything else? Questions?
I guess I'm interested in Connecticut, we're trying to take our community to the next level. And a lot of things you talked about are really pertinent to what we're doing. Just kind of curious, from what you've seen in different communities around the U.S., you know, what are the important pieces you need to get right in terms of getting from small to really big and thriving? You've talked about 4 pillars, but how does it look in other communities?
So I think there's definitely a few other things that I don't mention. This is like, I'm talking about the center of an ecosystem, but I do think access to capital is really, really important, and access to capital driven with the right intention, with the fewest number of strings possible, right? Because, you know, a lot of times, and these can be fundamentally important to a state, a lot of times, like, the state will put money together, cool. But if there are too many strings and it's too hard to get and it takes too long, you kind of sputter out. So you have to make sure that, you know, there's some way to screen, but if you put that money to work, I don't want to say faster because that's the wrong word, but more easily for the entrepreneurs, you tend to get faster growth of the entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs aren't stupid. They're going to go to wherever their business gets to get grown, right? Unless they're fully constrained by other things. But in general, entrepreneurs aren't stupid. So if they think that capital is good capital and it'll make me go faster, they're going to take it. And so I think, you know, the states can do a lot to make that happen. But if it takes a year and you're probably a 5% chance of getting it, the entrepreneurs aren't going to stay around that long, or they're never going to develop their business. So if states want to do stuff, you gotta let the money flow in some way, or you have to attract it in different ways. And I think a lot of that's happened in New Haven. Like, certainly Yale's trying to do some stuff, but I'm sure I only know about that, but I'm sure many other universities are too, to kind of get the innovation to come out of their labs. And, but does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Anyone else want to? Yes.
Question.
Oh.
You were talking about the capital, and at the beginning you talked about different ways to get the entrepreneurs where they need to be. And I'm wondering if, from where I sit, because I'm in both camps, I'm on the angel investor side, and I'm also working with companies that are bootstrapped.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of, so much emphasis on raising funds as if people write about things as if funding is the goal.
Yes.
And there's a lot of companies that can be really good companies, but will never be good equity investments because of the space that they're in or because of the speed that they're growing at. And do you see alternative ways to support those companies financially when they can't necessarily raise angel money or VC money?
You know, I work with a lot of companies like that where we sit down and decide, ooh, the best path for you is, I mean, I call it customer funded, right? Yeah. Which somebody reminded me recently we used to call revenue. So I was like, oh yeah, revenue, yeah, that. So I think, I mean, truly most businesses are born and grown that way. Like 99% of businesses, that's how it actually works. And we get all caught up in the blogosphere and the Twittersphere about venture capital and, you know, Sequoia put this money in and blah, 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 all this stuff. But I agree with your first point, which is, you know, entrepreneurs are actually the practical ones mostly in this category, where they might get caught up in the hoopla around venture capital, but the real ones figure out quickly if that's going to help them grow their business. But, okay, let me rewind a little bit and start answering that question differently, which is, I think entrepreneurs fundamentally understand where the constraints are and try to go around them or go through them. And so, and that's what I think that's this like trust and commitment piece, which is, I trust that entrepreneurs are going to do that. And so I just help them try to avoid like really big potholes of, you know, a fantasy that a venture capitalist is going to write them a $10 million check tomorrow, or, you know, the fantasy that they can grow this just through revenue, right? That's what I try to avoid, and get them really thinking reasonably about where their business, how their business could get funded, and get out of the hype cycle, right? Because the hype cycle is very, very dangerous.
Do you see in the entrepreneurial community, and particularly in Boston, that there's a filter that filters for investable companies and away from bootstrapping companies? Or
I don't. I know a lot of angels and a lot of, I mean, okay, yes, the venture capitalists are filtering for companies that they can put money to work in, right? As they should be, that's their business model. But I think there are a lot of people, especially second and third time entrepreneurs, who are supporting each other in bootstrapping their businesses. And there are lots of pockets of that type of entrepreneur, which is really cool. And in fact, I would say if you've been burned by in getting venture invested in your last company, I would say there's a 99% chance you want to grow this one through bootstrapping. And so those entrepreneurs find each other, and they're great. Like, they're often seasoned execs. They know exactly what they're doing. They know how to do that. But I think clustering people like that is even better, and I make sure that they know about each other, so that they can act as a support system. Because it's also not simple, and you often need you need either some money in the bank or somebody who's going to support you through that first 6 to 9 months, and in order to make that bootstrapping case happen. So, hope I answered your question. Not sure I did. Yes?
Could you expand a little bit on the time boundary and push concept?
Yeah.
We've had a lot of discussions internally with regard to how active a role a mentor should play in trying to get the company to move forward. as opposed to just being sort of a Socratic facilitator?
I love that boundary. That's a really, really tricky one. So I think the very, 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 very best true mentors use a lot of Socratic. And sometimes the volume of Socratic goes up, like, I'm not going to stop asking that question till you actually answer it. But they continue down that Socratic. But I also think there's an equally valid partner. I wouldn't call them a mentor. I would say they're more of like a partner or advisor that can play into a more operational role where they might have more experience, let's say, in sales. And they might just say to a CEO, like, you've never sold into companies. You don't get how this works. Let me show you how this works. And I would say those people are equally as valid and important, but I probably wouldn't try to confuse those two roles because I think they're quite different. And so when you are moving, and some people move very, very fluidly between those roles, but that's a very unusual person and often has been doing it a long time. But they are also, people who can switch hats like that are confusing to entrepreneurs because they don't know, is this just a smart person trying to tell me how to run my business? Or is this actually somebody who knows what they're doing? And I think that's a deeply confusing moment to many, many entrepreneurs, as it should be, because with people who become mentors, they're often really, really smart and really, really successful. And really, really smart and really, really successful people think they know a lot about everything because that's how they've, I'm successful in one thing, of course I can, talk about 5 other things. So I think the mentors that are kind of master mentors understand where their zones of expertise are and then try to bring in other people who complement their zones of expertise so they don't get into that weird, mushy middle. So part of the role in Techstars that I play is to remind our mentors where their zone is and remind the entrepreneurs not to necessarily trust when they're advising on an expertise area that mentor really doesn't understand. And so, but you kind of need somebody to help you navigate through that because I think it's really tough as an entrepreneur to know. Talk about your experience in that exact situation. So that makes a mentor be real about what they actually know because they've lived it, but they got to tell their story, not tell you what to do. They say, okay, when I faced that situation, when I was a CEO of this, here's how I handled it, right? So it keeps everybody in the right mindset. Does that answer your question?
In part.
Okay.
I'm thinking about Techstars has a certain duration.
Yes, okay, you want to talk about that?
Okay, and there's an expectation, as you said, that, oh gee, when I get to demo day, I'm going to have certain things to say. I guess I'm asking how much structure does the program have in terms of supporting the companies to achieve those expected deliveries?
So we do not preordain what those expected deliverables should be, ever. We just try to work with a company to figure out, how do you take out fundamental risk in your business? And then from there, it's pretty easy to figure out kind of what should your goals be by the end of the program so that you can explain this business, explain to somebody else how you're going to grow it, whether that's capital raising or not. And so it's more that than it is a structured program in the way that some things are, where there's like 12 steps, write a business plan, do this, do that. We don't do that at all. We work with every company very individually to help them figure out where they need to get to for the kind of business they want to grow. And the reason we think putting a time box around it is so important is that if you don't, you can go on for a long time with too many iterations and you don't force an entrepreneur to think through stuff rapidly. And I think there are sometimes when decisions can't be forced and you got to get data, but there are a lot of decisions that get mulled over for way, way too long that just need to get decided. And having some time-boundedness to it does help. We have found over the years does help a lot of people and a lot of companies. So that's why we've chosen to be time-bounded. And we debate all the time, like, is 3 months too much? Is 4 months? Is 5 months? Is 6 months? And we think about 100 days is enough to make significant progress in your business. Not to say your business is done, but to get on the right footing to go forward. So, yeah. Yes?
In developing a vibrant and dynamic entrepreneurial ecosystem, I'm curious about what your thoughts are of what does Boston have that New Haven could learn a lesson from or adopt or take on as a way to grow and develop more?
Well, I don't know how many, what I like to see is people clustering together. So that's why I love things like this, like where you get people clustered together, because that clustering just makes everyone work harder. So there's maybe 100 places in Boston where people are clustered. Techstars being one of them, right? Each university has a cluster point for entrepreneurs. There's a whole bunch of co-working spaces and in all different fields, green tech, biotech, robotics. So there's a lot of cluster points, and I think that's one way to tell the health of the community is how many cluster points do you have? And what I love to see is like a cluster point breaks off. Like it was all kinds of entrepreneurs together, and then people are like, why don't we go over there and set up a machine shop? And then we'll have hardware companies over there, and it's like, ooh, that's fun. Like something broke off, and I think that's when it gets really exciting, is when that happens over and over again. So does that make sense?
Great, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, have there been difficult points in terms of recruiting mentors into Techstars, and what have you done, if there have been any, what have you done to attract people, make the case?
I have to say there has not been any difficulty. And I think that, honestly, when you set up a community with these 4 pillars, people like to be in that space. They feel welcomed, and they feel like it's, oh, this is a good place to be. So that's what I try to set up. And so at least in the time that I've been doing it, there's been no problem finding mentors. And it's really fun because now we have all these different kinds of mentors, and just more and more people want to be involved. The other thing that's happened, which is extremely exciting, is people who sold their companies and are trying to figure out what's next come and hang out. 3 months, 6 months, they mentor companies, but they're also trying to figure out what their next thing is. And so it's really fun to have that mix where they're not really just mentors. They're like mentor creators, and I love having that group around. It's really, really great. So, yes.
Participation of women. We've had Startup America come and say, there's not enough women in entrepreneurship. We're tasking you with getting more women involved in Connecticut. Just in general, can you comment on thoughts on that?
If you look at entrepreneurship broadly and include small business, definitely not a problem, right? More than half of small businesses are started by women, blah, blah, blah. But if you just lop off hair salons and nail places, and businesses like that where they're local, small, not scalable, then all of a sudden you see this like precipitous drop in women across everything. There are no women funders, and very few, right? Very few women involved in early stage capital. More involved in banking, but very, very few involved in early stage capital. There are very, very few women involved in startups. I think right now we're at 4 or 5% of all of venture capital goes to companies with any woman in the management team. That's startling. right? That should be startling to people. And, but it's born, especially, actually it's a little bit better in biotech than it is in pure tech, right? So that cycle of computer science driven companies, computer science is dominated by men, they go start the companies, they invite their buddies, the women aren't in it, and it just like, and then they don't start the company, and then it's not exciting. You know, I mean, it's like this endless cycle. And a really hard one to break. And I've been thinking a lot about it. And I'm working right now on trying to figure out, you know, is there some structural way we could fix this? Could you essentially, just like we did in sports, is there a way to say Title IX for venture capital? Honestly, if we just take this next generation and we say, you know what, if you're in tech and you're a woman, here's a pool of capital. Entrepreneurs are smart. People are smart. They're going to come to that capital. And then we're going to seed a whole generation of more women entrepreneurs. And that's going to get more people to study computer science. Like, we got to have some way to fundamentally start that cycle. And what we've been doing to date has not worked. So there's a few people, you know, probably under 5%. We take about somewhere between 10 and 20% of our class are women CEOs. But would I love that to be 50? Of course I would. But if you look at our applicant pool, it's not even close. So the women who tend to apply to accelerators are pretty good on average. So that's why you get a higher percentage. But if you look at our total applicant pool and the number of women, even on any management team, it's very, very low. So we got to have some way to break that cycle. And I'm working on a bunch of stuff around that. Love to brainstorm.
Do you think it's more about the funding, or does it need to start earlier when you talk about and the computer science and the engineering? Or are you
I think the funding will fix it because people aren't dumb, and they're gonna, if they're like, wow, whoa, if I go start that company, get funded, like, they're gonna do it. What happens right now is, like, I do a bunch of teaching at MIT. And I always ask all the women in the class, they're computer science majors, for God's sake, are you gonna go start a company? And I'll ask it to a cross-gender class. About 80% of the men raise their hand and say, I'm gonna found a company. And I'm, all right, in the next 1 year, 2 years, now, I'm gonna do it now. The women, they're all like, 5 to 10 years. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what? And we know there's a lot of stuff around this, which are not bad traits, which are, I want to go learn from somebody else, and then when I go do it, I'll be better. That's actually not a terrible impulse. Turns out to be a very good impulse. But then what happens is 5 to 10 years after you are out of college, you're having babies. So you hit this double, like, bump, bump. And then all of a sudden you're 40 and you're starting your first company, right? And so, which isn't awful, but it means that so many fewer get started by women. And so you got to get through one of those bumps. So and I think the first bump you get through is you come out of college, maybe you work 1 or 2 years, and then you start your company. That's what the guys are doing, So let's give there some advantage to getting women to start earlier. So, way in the back.
Yeah, so I'm particularly thinking about investor communities and mentorship and experience.
Yep.
But I'm wondering if you have any insights into integrating like slow growth, long return companies into this whole ecosystem, right? Like tech is really quick return, quick growth usually.
8 to 10 years. Is that quick?
Well, yeah. On the life cycle, I think that's something like energy, right? Which the return might not be like.
Where there's fundamental science research that might take years and years and years before you can commercialize.
Right.
Or pharma.
To integrate those in with tech, or is that like a separate ecosystem?
You know what's really cool? I think there used to be these really, really bright lines between all these industries. And what I see more and more is, people in robotics clusters and people in green energy clusters and people in pharma clusters, trying to take some of those same lean, what we now call lean startup principles, and applying them. So I think there's a lot that's going to happen over the next 10 years on that, which will make the different ecosystems look closer to each other. But I still think, if you're a fundamental science company, you're just, how you fund the company, how you move forward is so different. You mainly rely on either inside a big pharma company to help you grow, or government grants, and those just take long periods of time that tech doesn't need, right? Because you just start coding, essentially. And so I think there are times in that kind of company's life cycle where they could match with tech companies really, really well. And there are just times that they will never. We've faced this a bunch with hardware companies, which have really different fundamental risks than tech companies. And what we try to do is, like I took one last fall, which was a mechanical device company. They were reinventing the spring, which is like fundamental to many, many things that we use every day. And the reason I thought we could accelerate them and that they could match with other tech companies is that they had prototyped like 9 different devices. I don't know, maybe they just did 100 and they just didn't tell me. But they had enough of a working concept that I thought that they could get investors behind them, which they needed. They could really show something starting to work. But a year before, when they had just been down in their machine shop making stuff, seeing if it would work, they weren't ready. But at that point, they were ready to be matched. So I just look at readiness for a company like that, and it's often really a different time period. It's usually a year or 2 later than a tech company would be. But once they're matched, then it's magic, because the tech companies get jazzed by having a mechanical device or a med device or a really different kind of business around them. And they get excited about each other's companies. And then they're friends for life, and they're never competing with each other, and lots of good stuff happens from there. And they have lots of the same issues, right? So, okay, maybe one more question? Yes.
New Haven is between two big entrepreneurial ecosystems. How should that affect how we develop?
Where's the fast train? Is it really going to come? Because that would be life-changing for a lot of people, I think, and for this ecosystem. When I was at SOM, I used to, for my second year of business school, I actually entered into the MIT 100. At that point, it was the 50K, which is their business plan competition, and we used to drive up about once a week and hang out in Boston. And that was life-changing for me, because first of all, I didn't actually know what a venture capitalist was. That was cool. So I got to learn a lot of language really, really quickly. So I guess my only point to that is, I think you have this unbelievable advantage in that you can mix in both communities really, really easily. And you should take advantage of that. Like treks, bring people up, that will get people coming down here and interested here as well. And it's not very far. So I think that's one big advantage. It's also for funding sources, right? Most of the funds are either in New York or Boston. You have some funds here, but very few. And it's pretty easy for a venture capitalist to think, oh yeah, I could be on a board in New Haven, because you could probably hold board meetings in Boston pretty easily. And those things matter, right? If you have to sit on a board for 5 years, 10 years, you think about how far away it is. And New Haven's pretty well positioned to tap into both of those capital sources, which is a constraint if you're living up in Syracuse, New York, right? That's a long drive. Or Ohio, or farther out than that. So I think that's one way that it's pretty easy. And also all the scientists know each other, so there's a lot of interplay there. So I think that helps mix things up too. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I would think of it. It's easy to mingle, and everyone should mingle, because we all get better by seeing people around us and understanding what's happening, who you're competing against, right? So, well, thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here.